Well, if you were able to come to Aldridge Parish Church in the mornings in 2019, you might remember that we made a start on reading through Mark's Gospel under the title, Who is This? Among other things that we looked at in that year. And last year, among other things, we continued to read through the middle section of the Gospel as part of our online services. The plan then, as we go into 2021, is to pick up again in Mark's Gospel where we left off, and we'll have a look at a little bit each week until we get up to Easter. So where we pick up again is actually Mark chapter 13, a little bit of a puzzling chapter of the Gospel. In terms of the big story, Jesus and his disciples have made it into Jerusalem. We've had the triumphal entry in chapter 11 and various interactions around the temple courts in chapter 12. And now as we move into chapter 13, we find Jesus leaving the temple and talking about some things with his disciples. Here is Jill to read the first 31 verses for us.
The reading is taken from Mark's Gospel, chapter 13, verses 1 to 31. As Jesus was leaving the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what massive stones, what magnificent buildings." "Do you see all these great buildings?" replied Jesus. "Not one stone here will be left on another. Everyone will be thrown down." As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John and Andrew asked him privately, Tell us, when will these things happen? And what will be the sign that they are all about to be fulfilled? Jesus said to them, "Watch out that no one deceives you. Many will come in my name, claiming I am he, and will deceive many. When you hear of wars and rumours of wars, do not be alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places and famines, and these are the beginning of birth pains. You must be on your guard. You will be handed over to the local councils and flogged in the synagogues. On account of me, you will stand before governors and kings as witnesses to them. And the gospel must first be preached to all nations. Whenever you are arrested and brought to trial, do not worry beforehand about what to say. Just say whatever is given you at the time, for it is not you speaking, but the Holy Spirit. Brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child. Children will rebel against their parents and have them put to death. Everyone will hate you because of me, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. When you see the abomination that causes desolation standing where it does not belong, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the housetop go down or enter the house to take anything out. Let no one in the field go back to get their cloak. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that this will not take place in winter, because those will be days of distress unequalled from the beginning when God created the world until now, and never to be equalled again. If the Lord had not cut short those days, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect whom he has chosen, he has shortened them. At that time, if anyone says to you, "Look, here is the Messiah," or "Look, there he is," do not believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. So be on your guard. I have told you everything ahead of time. But in those days following that distress, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. At that time, people will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory, and he will send his angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of the heavens. Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. Even so, when you see these things happening, you know that it is near, right at the door. Truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
So it is a bit puzzling, this chapter, and it's also controversial. It's been interpreted in different ways over the centuries. Is it, for example, only talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, which was to come? Or is it also talking about the end of the world and about Jesus' own return? I'm going to come back to that question next week, God willing. This week, what I want to do is focus on the evident pastoral concern that Jesus has for his disciples. Whatever the timescale, he is clearly talking to them about a time when they will be without his presence among them as they've come to know it. They've walked with him, talked with him, learned from him, been sent out to minister with his authority and then been able to report back. They've travelled now to Jerusalem with him and they're expecting great things. And yet he talks to them about a different future when they will not have him with them in that way. Many will come in my name, for example, verse 6, claiming I am he. He's not imagining that that's going to happen next time he pops out to the shops. This is an extended period of time he's talking about. And Jesus' pastoral concern for his disciples is over where they're going to find their security. Are they going to find it in the grandeur of Jerusalem, in its buildings, in its temple? Are they going to find it in a precise set of predictions about what the future holds? Are they going to find it in the safety of the world? And if those places are not the right places to look for security, then what is? Where should they, Jesus' disciples, look for their security? Where do you look for your security? Well, I've had enough of freezing cold Aldridge, and so I'm going to transport myself to Jerusalem and ditch my coat. It can also be freezing in Jerusalem in January. Sometimes it snows. This is why Jesus says in verse 18, pray that these things will not happen in winter. But as it happens, it is an unseasonably warm day today in Jerusalem with glorious sunshine and a forecast high of 19 Celsius. And what you're looking at behind me is the view from the Garden of Gethsemane at the foot of the Mount of Olives, across the Kidron Valley and up the hill to the Temple Mount platform. More or less the scene of today's reading. Verse 1, as Jesus was leaving the temple, one of his disciples said to him, look, teacher, what massive stones, what magnificent buildings. He's very excited, this guy. He's come down to the south from Galilee with Jesus to the capital city, and he's absolutely loving it. And he is very impressed by the temple. Such sturdy stonework and awesome architecture inspires a sense of security. It promises permanence. But listen to Jesus' reply, verse 2, do you see all those great buildings? Not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down. Well, what you see behind me is the eastern wall of the Temple Mount platform. When Herod the Great decided to rebuild the second temple, he felt that the hill that it was on didn't give him enough space. So he built a massive retaining wall all around and filled it up to make a level space. And then he built the temple on that and some other amazing buildings as well. Well, this wall has been rebuilt a few times over the centuries, but there are still some Herodian stones at the bottom of it. And I guess the scene which the disciples and Jesus were looking at as they sat here across the Kidron Valley was pretty much like this, only probably even more impressive. The amazing buildings on the platform, however, have gone. There are different ones there now, and you may be able to see the top of the Dome of the Rock peeping up over the wall. But the buildings that the disciples saw and were amazed by have gone, just as Jesus prophesied. In AD 70, the Romans came and captured the city and tore down all of those buildings. More on that next week. Buildings are not permanent, and they are not ultimately the place for us to find true security. You can see the temptation, of course, if you think that God is especially present there. I've been on the staff team now at a number of churches, and in every one of them, except for where I am now, I can remember a visit from a primary school class where the teachers have urged the children to be quiet on the basis that this is the house of God. It's the house of God. It's not though, not really. God is no more present in a church building than he is present anywhere else. And this is something I guess we've had to grasp hold of more than ever over the last year, when for large chunks of it our buildings have been closed. For sure, it's been a challenge, and it continues to be. Many of us might be feeling like this teacher.
Hey, so as some of you guys might know, I'm a music teacher, and I found that one of the best ways that I can process the whole transition to online learning and teaching is to write a song. So I wrote a song. I'd like to share that with you guys now. Here we go.
God is still with you, though, at home, which is where I imagine you are right now. Don't find your security in buildings, says Jesus, because one day they will be gone. And maybe you will think that that means that God has gone as well, because you invested so much in the connection between God and the building. But no, he hasn't gone. There is somewhere else to look for security, somewhere much better. Well, as we move into verses 3 and 4, we discover the next place where we might be tempted to find our security. As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will these things happen, and what will be the sign that they are about to be fulfilled?" Oh, it would be great to know the future, maybe, or a little bit of it. Ever since these amazing vaccines have been shown to be effective against the virus which is causing mayhem and grief across the world, but pretty much every time the Prime Minister or another minister holds a press briefing, one of the journalists will ask for an estimate about when we might be able to get back to normal. But the ministers don't know, do they? Frankly, how can they know? There are too many variables and there's no such thing as a crystal ball. It would be better for all of our sanity if they stopped asking the question and if the ministers stopped trying to speculate. But we want to know because we think it will make us feel more secure. We'll be able to plan better. We won't be so stressed. Perhaps this desire to know the future is why people visit fortune tellers and read their horoscopes and things. Within the religious world, there have always been people who have taken the Bible and have tried to deduce from it a detailed countdown to the end of the world. They plunder the books of Daniel and Revelation especially and come up with projections and predictions. The Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, have so far predicted 7 different dates for Armageddon, and none of them has come to pass. So although Jesus does answer the question, and this chapter records a lot of things he says to look out for, he doesn't answer it in a way which would encourage you to write out a timetable. In fact, if we cast our eyes on a bit to the end of the chapter, we find in verse 32 that not even the Son of God knows the timetable. Only the Father knows it. And I suppose the reason for this is that those who think they do know the timetable are always distracted by it. Instead of living in the now, and instead of living for Christ in the now, they're tempted to take up a ministry of waiting and doing nothing. The Apostle Paul writes of such people at the end of the second letter to the Thessalonians. As we'll see next week, the real ministry of waiting is a ministry of working. So Jesus doesn't want his disciples to find their security in buildings, and he doesn't want his disciples to find their security in predictions. And lastly, he doesn't want his disciples to find their security in safety, a safe world. Because what Jesus does then from verse 5 onwards is that he recounts some of the things that are going to happen in the world, things which will happen before he returns. And these things are signs that God's purpose is somehow being worked out, not necessarily signs that the end is immediately about to happen. Verse 6, many will come in my name, claiming I am he, and will deceive many. When you hear of wars and rumours of wars, do not be alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places and famines. These are the beginning of birth pains. And then he talks about some of the experiences that they will face as Christians of persecution, handed over to local councils, flogged in synagogues, standing before governors and kings as witnesses to Christ. Now, these, of course, were things which the early disciples faced, but they've also been happening all the way through the centuries as well. And Jesus wants his disciples across the ages not to be terrified when they see these things, thinking that God has lost control. He wants us to keep going, to keep persevering, because verse 13, everyone will hate you because of me, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. He's saying, if you look for a peaceful, safe and prosperous life, you're likely to be disappointed. One of the things about COVID perhaps is that it has disturbed a sense of peace and safety and prosperity that many of us in the West were beginning to take for granted, beginning even to trust in. Jesus is saying in this chapter that there will be all sorts of terrible things which happen. And it shouldn't come as a surprise. He's urging his disciples to keep going, to keep persevering, Jesus teaches these things actually for our assurance, so that we won't be thrown by the things that we see around us, by the things which happen to us, but so that we might keep going, walking with him, staying faithful to him day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year. Well, if the disciples are not to find their security in buildings or predictions or in a safe and cosy world, where are they to find it? Well, I'm going to leave that one with you and suggest that you either skip back and listen again to the last verse which Jill read today, or to pick up a Bible and open it at Mark chapter 13 and read verse 31 to yourself. What does Jesus say there? What does he mean? And what does it mean for where we might find our security? And how might you respond in your own life?